So I think there are little traffic issues going on today. So we don't have a full house just yet, but we thought we'd get started since you all waited so patiently. So very quickly, to my left is Nick Hornby, the screenwriter. Saoirse Ronan, of course, you know who she plays. Here she is. And Finola Dwyer, the producer. I just came in from Brooklyn on the subway to do this. So. Granddaughter of Mary Riley and Arthur Boyle, and granddaughter of Mariana Petruccelli and Carlo Mazzoni. But anyway, so I feel especially suited. To do this. But since we have the three of you here, Nick, let me just start with you about the screenplay. And how you go about doing this. Did you read the book and decide to do it, or did you and John get together first and he had you do it? Talk about that process.
Well, Finola and her producing partner, Amanda Posey, my wife, bought me the book and asked me to read it, and I read it and loved it, and thought that I could see how to do it. So I worked with those two, with Finola and Amanda, for a while before we brought John on.
And Saoirse, had you read the book, or were you brought in at a point where they sent you the screenplay?
I had actually read the book a couple of years before I even heard about the script, because I felt like it had been floating around for a while by the time we actually spoke about it. And yeah.
Saoirse was 9 when I started writing it.
Yeah, I was a fetus. I was a child. But you were holding off for me, though, weren't you?
Exactly.
Writing it for me while I was in the womb.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, eventually I got to read the script, and it was really interesting because, you know, I've done a few films that have been adapted from books, and I've never really read the book beforehand. I've always wanted to focus on the script. And this had been something that I had been exposed to a couple of years before, but I remember reading the script and loving it when I met John. I was about 18 when I met him, 18, nearly 19, and I was thinking about moving away myself. I was thinking about like making that big sort of step. And so it was another year before we actually shot the film, and in that time I had made that move. So when I went back to the script again, I felt like everything that between Colm's writing and Nick's amazing screenplay had just like really kind of hit me on a completely different level. It meant so much more to me over the course of that year. So.
All right, let's see. Do we have microphones for people? Okay. So questions here in the white top. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question for Nick Hornby. My impression from the film it seems a little more sentimental than the book, that leaves out perhaps some of the tougher realities both in Ireland and New York. Was that your decision or the producers to do that?
There was no decision to leave out any tough stuff. The decision was to try and produce a screenplay that worked and affected people. And, you know, when you adapt a book, you focus on the line of the narrative, and anything on either side tends to get left out, I think. I wanted to write the screenplay that I thought would affect the greatest number of people.
In the black sweater, I think, up there.
Congratulations to all of you. The film is just fantastic.
Thank you.
I have a question, I guess, for Finola. I'm fascinated by how you put the co-production together and how the choices were made as far as the Canadian piece. Obviously, it has nothing to do with Canada. And as a producer, I'm always interested.
Well, initially, we looked at making it in New York and Ireland, and I had various financiers who were interested in doing it at a much higher budget, and slowly they kind of, fell away for various reasons, and and there probably was a time a few years ago when to make a movie like this, the studios would have done in a heartbeat, and they don't anymore. And so it was about trying to, I didn't want to just make it, I wanted to make it really well. So I made up a lookbook of all the kind of locations we were looking for to replicate of Brooklyn 1951, and the countries and states across America that offered incentives. Hello, welcome.
So you turned up, did you?
We're going to do a little quick introduction here, maybe, and then
Divas are here.
continue. So I'm glad you got here.
Traffic.
Down at the end, John Crowley, the director, and Colm Tóibín, who wrote the book.
So yes, we made up a lookbook of the locations we were looking to replicate, and looking at the various incentives that you could get. And it took me to Canada, and I scouted Toronto and Montreal was the sort of winner. So it was really where we could go and creatively make the film we want, as well as getting as much what we call soft money. And Montreal, and we did 2 days in New York, 1 day in Brooklyn and 1 day in Coney Island.
And before we take another question, since the two of you are here too, maybe you two can speak about something you were talking about before about sort of somebody had asked a question about that the screenplay may not have taken everything of some of the hardships and things that were in the book. Do you want to speak to that, of how the film was made, if things were left out, or it's just the way that the screenplay came and how you made the film?
So did you say that the hardship was left out?
Well, there was a question there, yes.
We've been attacked for sentimentality.
Yes, you've been attacked
okay.
for
Gosh.
not my words, Nick's words.
Well, I think that if you're writing a novel and you need to suggest that over time someone is under great pressure and is unhappy, you really have to do it again and again and again in a novel. If you do it again and again and again in a film, the audience says, yes, we already know that. Because in the scene, which, you guys together, where the letter comes and you go upstairs, well, that's enough. This unhappiness has been bubbling under. And there's a second scene, which is when you realize that she's under pressure at work. There's a sense of her being the woman she's working for. This is in Brooklyn, is actually quite unpleasant in a certain way, watching her all the time. Those two things do what a film can do and a novel can't do. They signal an emotion. But if you do that 3 more times, you lose the intensity of it. And so it's a completely different system, whereas in a novel, you do have to hit again and again and again at it. So that would be my answer to that it's absolutely clear to the audience that both at work and personally, she's under very great pressure. And I think that can't be more clear, really. But if it's made more clear, you lose it.
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly no intention to soften anything. Quite the opposite, really. But it was really just all about staying as focused on Eilis, very, very specifically, and quite close to her emotionally as we possibly could, and that the whole film would feel what she was feeling, as it were. And but it may well be also that in a film, this sort of feeling of rapture you get when she actually does meet Tony is quite enhanced. It's a different kind of moment in a film than it is in a novel, I think. It carries more of a certain kind of emotion. So it maybe feels like that was lent on more, but I think that's a formal thing rather than an intentional thing on our behalf.
Yeah, no, I think you all hit the nail on the head on why you have novels and then why you have screenplays. So, okay, here.
Thank you all for your beautiful work. My question is to the director. The landscape of faces in this film are like Terence Davis. They really just sort of set the viewer into the scene of who these people are, just looking at them. So I'd like to know about the casting, particularly Ethan Coen, And Julie Walt, just bringing her back to us in America is a treat, so thank you. But just talk about how you cast the film.
Bit by bit is really the only answer. You know, I mean, you sort of cast, and I work with a very good casting director. Who also happens to be the mother of my 4-year-old boy, so I get a lot of work done across the kitchen table of an evening. You know, I don't cast from looks. You cast if it's a speaking role, obviously, with the exception of the Christmas Day sequence. You cast for an actor's sort of inherent truth, and Julie has an Irish mother, and she'd never played Irish that I knew of. So it sort of felt like that she would know who this woman was, and she instantly recognized who this woman was and went after that rather deliciously, you know. But once we had our main leads in place, it was really about finding the exact right actor. A lot of them are in the Irish section, aren't well-known actors, but they're very, very well-known in the Irish theatre, so they're great character actors. And then when, you know, one of the interesting things on the Christmas Day sequence, which was all shot in Montreal, of course, was that a lot of those men didn't speak English. You know, they're French Canadian. But we had a very good extras casting person in Montreal, and with the help of a number of books that I pointed her towards, I said, they got to have faces like these. And she went and found them. And because then all of those obviously evoke a whole sort of coastal shelf of stories, that any one of which could be a film in itself, you know. Tony? Tony was a journey, to put it mildly, you know, and there were a lot of ideas, there's a lot of suggestions for larger names, but it was to find somebody who was believably alpha enough to be a plumber in Brooklyn, but also had the sensitivity, truthfully, was a tall order. And Emery put himself on tape, as it were, and it was invited to put himself on tape. And the second he did that, it was one of those auditions, one of only 2 that I've ever seen in my life, where you instantly know that's our guy. And yeah, he just had those 2 elements in for free, and was wonderful in The Place Beyond the Pines, but was very scary, you know. And so I spoke to Derek Sanfrance and said, is he acting? or is that just who he is? And he said, no, he's acting, he's acting.
And Saoirse, talk about, I mean, you're very young, but you've made lots of films and your name is there. And did you automatically come to her? Did it automatically come to you? Did you audition? Did you have to work for it? How did you come into this piece?
I feel like, I mean, I heard about it and you came over within the space of like 3 weeks or something. You know, I had read the book, as I said, a few years before. And loved it. But then by the time I heard about the screenplay, I knew Fiona was casting, I knew Fiona. She sent John over to me in Ireland, and we just talked, and we just went and had a cup of tea and had some food. And I was saying before you got here that that's when I was thinking about moving away, and so the story really kind of spoke to me in that way. So I just remember us kind of, me asking you about your experience of moving away, and I was very much in that mindset anyway, and I think from then on, it felt like it was kind of set in stone, right? Is that?
Yeah, and you know,
From my
it
point
felt
of view,
that Saoirse was, in the very, very best sense, the obvious idea in Ireland, in perfect age for it, and had proven herself as an actress, but was maybe waiting for the big role to take you from younger roles to an adult role. And but what sort of came for free with her was life experience, which is that between us meeting and talking for the first time and actually getting on set, which was a full year, you went through a lot of the things that Eilis goes through, which is you left home, you got a boyfriend, and you moved to London, to perfidious England, and experienced what's quite unusual if you are a young urban person who leaves Ireland right now, and you don't expect to be homesick, you know, and because home is a text away, a phone call away, it's an hour away on a plane. It's not like leaving in the 50s when you would leave on a boat, and yet to be able to experience that same feeling, which I think is what's universal about what Colm wrote, which is the split that happens in somebody when they leave home. That it's almost suggests that it's a sort of a wound that won't be healed up all that easily. You just embrace it and learn to live with it. So all of that, Saoirse brought with her to set, thankfully.
I think as well, I know the thing that struck me in the script and with my own personal experience was sort of, and everyone seems to feel this way, is that it's not even the act of leaving home, the physical act of like moving away from home, but it's more the realization that you get when you've left, that you can't go back to how it was ever again. And this sort of grief, this like haze of grief starts to set in. And as Colm and Nick kind of so beautifully put it, homesickness is something that stays with you for a while until it's passed on to somebody else, and you don't know when that's going to be, and you can never sort of calculate how long it's going to last for or prepare yourself for it. And I think that's kind of the scariest thing out of everything, is that there's this heaviness that you feel, you know, and you don't know when that's going to be lifted. And of course it is, but I was still in that state when we did the film, so it was such an incredibly vulnerable place to be in.
And you'd never played Irish before?
No.
Which was incredible, actually.
Yeah, and that was the other thing, is that I was waiting for the right Irish character to come along, you know. There had been scripts sent to me over the years, and a lot of scripts that people had written about, you know, Irish folklore or famous Irish characters from our past. But it just didn't feel like the heart of us had really been captured. And I feel like with a lot of the films that have come out over the last while, it hasn't captured our spirit. And that was one of the first things I said to you, was that, you know, Nick, this fella from England, was able to come along and completely capture our spirit so perfectly, right? And that was amazing, and that was so exciting to be a part of something where I felt like everyone that was involved in the film understood us and understood the magic of the Irish, you know.
Let's see. Okay, over here.
There's a beautiful shot when we say goodbye to Jim, when we see him the last time, and there is almost like dust in the air that looks like ashes or snow. And for me, that encompasses the grief you were talking about. Maybe that is the homesickness in the air?
Yeah, I don't want to take away the poetry from it, because it's one of those moments where we got lucky, but someone hadn't done the hoovering, basically, okay? I mean it. I tell that at our own expense, because it's one of those moments, right, which it washed up in the rushes, as it were, you know, because when you're looking on the monitor and down the pipe of the camera, you didn't really see that. And we were shooting, and, you know, as always, you're under pressure, and it's like you don't have enough time, and it's sort of, come on, let's go again. And after about 3-4 takes, I think it was the rushing around, people running in and out, tape measures, you know, all the stuff that happens was just making the dust come up from the mat, I'm afraid. Of course we intended it, and it took hours to get. But it's sort of, and it's completely unenhanced, and people have asked, you know, did you add that after this? No, it's God's own dust sprinkled around. But it's yeah, you got to get lucky at some point, don't you? So there you go.
Yes, here. Oh wait, no, wait for the mic, please.
First of all, sir, if you had the novel on you, I'd give you money now to read it. I am so in love with these characters. Oh my God, I don't want to leave these characters at all. I want to know more about them. And of course, it's you as an actress, absolutely fantastic. And as a director, whomever did your extra casting, you had people of color in Brooklyn in the front. So my question to you, and it might sound a little weird, and please don't think me, you know, a garish American. There was a movie of many years ago called Soul Food that became a series. Any goals, any desire to maybe see this like on a Netflix or a Hulu?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank God.
Producer.
Yeah, well, we had said that at the time, that when we were shooting all the Miss Kelly scenes, it was so stressful. It was like amazing and wonderful and funny. But we did like 8 dinner scenes in one day. And I think because we had Julie, who was so bloody brilliant, she like kind of kept it all going. And we said at the time, if we were ever going to have a spin-off, it was going to be Mrs. Kelly's, right?
Yeah, the boarding house is definitely.
Or sorry, not Miss Kelly's, Macchio's, I mean, Macchio's.
Mrs. Kelly's would be very different.
Mrs. Kelly's would have been great.
We don't want Mrs. Kelly, no,
Come
no.
and visit.
Macchio's.
I'm doing that one, Mrs. Kelly's shop.
You can do that. There's
miserable
not,
one, yeah.
not much soul food around Nettles
No
Kelly's
sentimentality in that one.
place. We'll make up for the softness in the film with the
Yeah,
Nettles Kelly
exactly.
spin-off.
Yeah.
Right there in the, yeah, wait for the mic.
Hi, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about releasing this film kind of in this moment where we're having all these conversations about migrants and immigration, just if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I do. It's a tricky one because, you know, this is, in lots of ways, a very small story, but it has scale. You know what I mean? Is that it hopefully suggests a lot more than the actual size of one young woman's journey. It's also rather internal, and it doesn't rely on melodrama or large dramatic events to keep moving forward. When you look at the contemporary migrant crisis, to be honest, the closest parallel would be the famine migration in Irish history, which is a very, very different thing, but that has sort of shocking parallels, I think. So, but it's a story which, I don't know, if at its best, maybe it humanizes the idea of migrants. I mean, there's a very different relationship to immigration here, a very different tone to the conversation about immigration here than there is, for instance, in the United Kingdom, you know, so, yeah. It's a very big issue to walk around.
I mean, we've all been talking about it a lot, of course, because it is in the sort of zeitgeist. And I think in terms of Eilish's journey and all those thousands of people, hundreds of thousands that came from Ireland, came from Italy at that time and at the end of the First World War, they were all in search of a better life. And I think that's what a lot of the crisis now is the same. Those people are also in search of a better life.
A long time before I talked first to John about the script, I talked to Mike Nichols about the script. He'd asked to speak to me, and we had a phone conversation, which was very interesting. And he said, I think that you need to make a case for why this story now. And he said, and there are lots of cases to be made. And I think he meant that I should make that case somehow in the script. And I kind of politely disagreed, because I think that actually whenever you make this film, there is always going to be that argument going on in the time in which the film is being released. And in fact, we're having this huge argument about it and debate about it in Europe at the moment. And there are various people on the right politically who say enough's enough and we don't want any more despite what's happening. And it's quite interesting to bring a film out in that time which says these are how countries are made. Countries are made by shifts and influxes, and there's never a good time not to talk about it, I think.
This is a secret history of Ireland over a period of 150 years, and it's still going on in Ireland. In other words, that if you graduate now from a university in Ireland, there's still no work for you, and you have to find another country to go to. And as I was writing the book, it was happening. But as I was writing the book, something else was going on in Ireland, and I was acutely conscious of it, which was that for the first time in our history, people were starting to come to Ireland looking for work. That a lot of Polish people arrived in Ireland, a lot of Nigerians. Suddenly, Ireland was a place of destination. And Ireland was uneasy about this. Ireland wasn't sure, because we were so used to being the victim, or the country that sent our young people abroad, suddenly having them arrive, people arriving, And I was aware that I had to be careful with the book, not to preach. I'm not involved as a writer in preaching to my nation. But nonetheless, there was an undercurrent in the book was, look, this is what it's like to arrive in another country looking for work. And, you know, someone who will eventually become a citizen. This is what it's like the first year. Please have pity on the Polish people, on the Nigerian people, on the Chinese people. Please see them in this way. But I didn't want to make that clear. I wanted to make it in a way, I wanted to dramatize one case, one story of an Irish person. But I did have in the back of my mind that for an Irish audience reading it, thinking, oh my God, that must be how the girl who actually, who's working in the supermarket, that must be when she looks sad, the Polish girl, that must be what she's going through. So I was aware, of that other story, of the contemporary story, as I was writing the book, and aware also of the effect the novel might have on a reader. I suppose with every novel, you have somewhere or other to try and, that the reader learns to imagine something they might not have imagined before, and that, no matter what you do, has political implications.
Here, down here in the front.
Hi, thank you very much for this movie. I'm so happy to be here today just because I've been looking for answers and I finally found them. I've been here for 3.5 years, and in 2.5 weeks I'm going back to Russia and I'm terrified. And I found so much myself in the main character and all the struggles. And in general, it's a beautiful picture, but I would like to ask the director about first of all, and say thank you for costume design and the music. The costume design was amazing, and but my question about the score writing, the movie itself is very sentimental, and the music is only enhanced. So I could understand the first question about the sentimentality of the movie itself. So could you tell me about your work with the music designer and the sound designer? What was your idea? How did you want to use the music as a tool?
So there's two things. One is, I would say, I disagree with the word sentimental, only because sentimentality to me feels like either like unearned emotion or indulged in emotion for its own sake. And right from the outset, it felt like the film would work with an audience if it was emotional in a way which is not particularly fashionable now, right? And that it wasn't cool. We weren't going to hang back and be ironic about it. You would have to go in there and be emotional, and the score would have to come in underneath that and help express that. But I didn't want the score to have a specifically Irish idiom either, which is to have uilleann pipes or to have which is oftentimes what happens when non-Irish filmmakers make films in Ireland. They sort of dial all that stuff up, and it drives me mad. And I felt I wanted the identity of the film and the look of the film as well to feel in the best possible way, almost artless, and to apply all the artfulness of a very, very talented crew to that, right? But to not keep saying, you see, it's Irish, it's Irish, it's Irish. And, Christmas Day then, it's very different. You have an Irish song in the Irish language, that you go there and put that in there. So, yeah, it's all about emotion, the score. Well, I don't know what more we can say than that. Michael Brook, who had done a number of wonderful scores and has a great history in ambient music, actually. I mean, he worked with Brian Eno for years and Peter Gabriel. It's a very unusual choice for this, in a way. But I find a lot of film scores to be either evocative of what the temp score on a film was, which is a sort of reheated version of last year's hit score, or to be sort of reworkings of cliched ideas, the same minor chords and in the major chords for certain kind of moments. And he, it took a long time because it was the first orchestral score he had done, but it's all the better for that because he wasn't playing by the rules. And I don't think he'd mind me telling you this, he doesn't read music, and neither did Paul McCartney, and that didn't affect him. So he was coming from a very intuitive place. And there are parts of the score that I listen to still, and I think, fucking hell, that's such an odd note to put in there. So I don't think it's sentimental. I think it's emotional, but it really does try and follow the edit very, very closely. It follows shot by shot. So, yeah.
I'm missing anybody in the back here. Yeah.
Thank you. This film was a lot to think about. I think it really delved into homesickness more than many other films that I'm thinking of. And somebody who's gone through that spoke to me very much. The question I had was about the nature of villainy in the film, because it seems like the film really only has one villain. And as I was watching it, maybe this is something of what other people are picking up on when they say sentimental, and whether we like that word or not. But there's a sense which I kept expecting characters to not be friends to Grealish, and they kept being friends to her. And there's a sense of a sort of fundamental decency to essentially every character in the film except the old woman, Kelly, yeah. And that really affected me. And in fact, the painful situations that she gets into in the film seem to be outside of any individual's control except the screenwriter or the writer. And it was and I don't know whether it provoked a certain nostalgia for a time when people were more decent, or if you could speak about this decision to maybe play up certain audience expectations for the headmistress to be sadistic or whatever, and it didn't happen. And I thought that was actually really fantastic and kind of brought into higher focus the just very natural homesickness that she was experiencing.
Well, I'd like to start, if that's all right. But, I mean, I think this idea that there should be a villain is not an idea from life. It's an idea from screenplay writing, actually. At the moment, and for quite some time, my life has not contained a villain. It's contained very good people who are trying to do their best. And yet, there are parts of my life that are enormously difficult and cause great pain. And I'm sure that's true of everybody in this row. I suspect it's true of everybody in this cinema. And the idea of writing, for me, is to try and convey the idea that life is extremely difficult for certain people at certain periods in their life, but not because a bad person has caused it. That it happens despite there being no bad person causing it. And for me, it's refreshing to find material where actually you can love everybody. The other thing that I see as my job as a writer is that I want to walk around and round everybody until I can see what it is that their friends and family love in them, even if they are flawed. And that to me is a whole person. There are very few people I've ever met that are irredeemable. And they do have fulfilled emotional lives, even if they're causing me trouble. I'm talking about critics, I suppose, in particular. But yeah, the villain thing is, for me, that's a screenplay by numbers thing.
I mean, I think one of the things you want as a novelist, if someone is going to write a screenplay of your novel, is that they also be a novelist. Because what I imagined was a young woman who, for some reason that she herself doesn't understand, attracts people. People like her. People do things for her. She's a sort of younger sister in the family. She's used to this. She doesn't do anything to cause it that's obvious. But nonetheless, everywhere she goes, people trust her. People give her promotion, or people fall in love with her. And she radiates this without attempting to do so. And of course, if you get with the wrong scriptwriter, somebody could say, yes, and I'm going to show how this breaks down. But the fun part is, what if it doesn't? What if she manages, when she goes to America still, with everyone she meets, by some natural sort of good manners, some natural charm, some natural ease, to actually win things for herself, small things, and then make a life for herself, and then be torn. is a. It requires, I think, great nerve on the part of a screenwriter to stick to that, to say, actually, there is drama in that, more drama than if you have her suddenly meeting her nemesis somehow. That if she doesn't, in other words, every novelist comes up against this all the time. I know what the movie would do, but as a novelist, I'm going to do exactly the opposite. I'm going to have the couple fall in love and stay in love in my novel. I know in a movie that wouldn't work, but in a novel it would. But actually, if you can transfer that to the screen, as Nick has done, it's a very powerful thing to do because it goes against the reader? No, there's not the viewer, the expectations, and therefore creates within itself a sort of drama.
It was a comment that we met with frequently when we were going out to financiers. Thankfully not that frequently or we wouldn't be sitting here, but there were quite a few who said, nothing really happens. It's sort of, and there is, as Nick says, this sort of 101 Robert McKee idea, inciting incident, 10 pages in, something has to happen, a bomb has to go off, someone's got to be shot or at least slapped, but something's got to, So the idea of making something where nobody actually even raises their voice in the entire thing. And trying to generate a different sort of tension. And I think it's right. A lot of people think, Tony's going to turn out to be ne'er-do-well. He's going to run away and leave her pregnant and on her own. Or, all this sort of melodramas that lurk in the shadows of a story which is actually just about everyday people leading lives of, quiet desperation, as the man says, getting on with it, is plenty of drama. And there's no shortage of it there. But one scene, not to go against everything we're just saying, which Nick expertly dialed up, should we say, for the film adaptation, is the confrontation with Nettles Kelly, the second scene. Because that was the scene where, in the novel, is left a little bit more ambiguous, certainly, and even the very end of the film, or the book, is left more ambiguous. Here needed to have a feeling that actually this was the moment in which she was going to announce who she was, and that the power that somebody like Nettles Kelly had over her and that the society had over her was one of secrecy and shame. And if she stood up and said, well, this is who I am, it's gone. It evaporates instantly, that the power is absurd in front of that, And to deliver her back to America felt like the final beat that somehow, if you had followed the story thus far, would be the right beat to finish the film on, which is not the same thing as a happy ending, right? But it felt like it was the right structural and emotional way to conclude, whereas in the novel, it finishes with her on the train where she closes her eyes, and then she thought no more about it.
I think this is the perfect place to end, with this lack of irony, with lack of villains, and just a really beautiful story. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.